Hi, Deena here. What follows is a short video on how I make applesauce. And I just want to make a note that this is the way that I do it at home for myself. If I was going to make this for other people or to use in some event, I would be using the commercial kitchen that we have here at Grow It Forward. So I hope it makes sense and enjoy. The first step in making applesauce is to take your apples and wash them. Most of the times, apples are sprayed with some type of pesticides, and you never know exactly what's on the apples that you get unless you happen to ask the person who grows them. So washing them off is just a good habit to get into anyway. So I just have some cool water in here, and like bobbing for apples, just letting them soak a little bit, and then taking my cloth, just a clean dishcloth, and just rubbing them down. I like to do this particularly because the way that I make my applesauce, I like to leave the peels on. I know a lot of the nutrients, a lot of the good fiber is found in the peel, and it just seems like cutting it off is a waste. Now these apples were picked a couple weeks ago. Some of them had bad spots, but you can cut around those. Too often when people buy produce, if they have bad spots or something on them, they'll throw them out, and there's a lot of waste because of that. Here's a good example. This one has all kinds of black spots on it, so this is one that I definitely will take the peel off. But usually that doesn't go too deeply, and I can get some good apple out of that. So again, I'm trying to get right down in where the stem is as well, just because that's a place where if they are sprayed, things could get congregated in that area. So I have a few more pails of apples, and I'm just going to continue to wash them until I'm ready for the next step. The next step is getting my favorite knife. I like a serrated one, and getting my pot, and I just take the apples. This is the way that I slice into them. To me, applesauce can be very simple. I just cut it in fourths around the core, and that leaves a little bit of waste in there, which I'll either bite off later or cut off little pieces for my oatmeal tomorrow. I like to put these upside down so I can just inspect to make sure that the peel looks okay, and then I will cut it into slices, and then after that maybe into thirds, just into smaller pieces, and then throw that into the pot. Sorry, you can hear my cat playing with a toy in the background. And for ones like this where there are some blemishes, I'll just do the same thing and take off the core. And again, there's some bruise spots and things, or if there's part of the end of the blossom there. So here, these brown spots, I'll just go in and use my knife to just cut off. There's a little bit more waste, but I have a lot of apples right now, and I'm trying to be as careful as I can to use all of the parts. You're perhaps noticing that I'm taking things and throwing them offside. I have a compost pail there, which I will, when I'm all done, I will take that into my compost, and that will break down over the winter, and then in the spring when I'm doing my planting, I will add that to the garden, and the plants in the garden can benefit from the nutrients. So I try not to waste any parts of what is harvested. Let's see, here's another one fairly large. Again, I just slice in like this. Sometimes I go in a little bit too deeply and I have to cut parts out. Like this, that's a little bit thicker, and it won't break down quite as much, so I don't like to include that part. And again, I'm just doing a visual inspection to make sure that the parts of the peel are okay, that there aren't any bad spots on the outside as well. Cut them down into little smaller pieces, and then throw them to the pot. So I will fill this up completely because the apples will cook down as we go on. So now that I've filled this with my apples and through cutting, I'm going to put, oops, I noticed one little spot here that I missed. I'm going to put just a little bit of water in. I don't want too much because there's already a lot of moisture in these apples, and I don't want it to get too watery. It'll take a longer time to cool down. So I will take this over to the burner, and then I will light my burner and get that cooking down. Put the cover on so it'll hold the heat just a little bit more, and we'll wait for the magic to happen. Alright, I can hear it making lots of noise, so we'll just do a quick check-in here, and it smells like cooking apples. So getting a little softer on the bottom, but still has a ways to go. So we'll let that heat up some more and soften up and cook those down a little bit. Alright, it's been cooking for 8 or 10 minutes maybe. So I'd like to give this a good stir and get the stuff that's cooking down on the bottom, bring it up to the top, and just get some of those other pieces going down. You can see on the spoon how it's starting to get mushy like what you'd expect. So I will just continue to stir this. And I wish that video cameras had smell, because boy does this smell good. And keep in mind, other than a little bit of water, all we have in here is just pure apples. Now you notice that lots of the peels will separate at this point, so if you're ambitious and you want to pick them out, you can. I find it's a lot easier to do it that way rather than spending the time to peel them. Although I do know that they make little gizmos that you can use to peel and core apples. It goes pretty smoothly, but from what I've seen, it does generate a fair amount of waste with homegrown apples just because they're not usually uniform size or shape. Look at how much that has cooked down. If you remember when we started, it was level to the top. So if I had more apples, I might throw them in at this point and continue to do so, but for today I'm just making a small batch of applesauce. So I'm going to let that cook down a little bit more, and we'll check back in another 5 or so minutes. Alright, really cooking now. So notice how processed it is. There's a lot of moisture and steam escaping. You can still see the shapes of the apples, but if you just push on them, they fall apart. And the peels continue to come right off. Notice how liquidy it is. So that's the reason why I did not want to add too much moisture to begin with. And if we just continue to stir this and cook it down, we will have our applesauce. I'll turn the heat down a little bit just because I don't want it to scald on the bottom of the pan, and notice it's bubbling up and kind of spraying all over the place. But this definitely looks like a nice chunky applesauce. So as I continue to stir it, I'm just pushing the pieces down against the bottom of the pan, or trying to do it up against the side, just to take all the bigger pieces and really mash them down. Now, I could stop here if I wanted to. What I like to do is just take a little bit of ground cinnamon and add it. One of the things about the way that I cook is I don't really use recipes. For me, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. You can do apples by weight. Otherwise, if you just do a certain number of apples, I will just take a little cinnamon and throw it in there and just assume, that'll be fine. What I will do a little bit later is I can do a taste. It's always better to start small, put in a little bit, because then you can always add more, but there's no way you can take it out. The other thing you can do is not put anything in, and then as you freeze your applesauce, or if you decide to serve it fresh, you can just have cinnamon or sugar or something on the table for people to add their own to their liking. And again, I just go with whatever the apples are. I kind of like my apples on the tart side, so I never add any sugar. I find, especially if it's an apple like a Gala apple, they're plenty sweet to begin with, so certainly don't need to add anything more. And as we look at the My Plate standards, and you look at what you should be eating, it's good to not have too much sugar in your diet. We find it in enough other foods to begin with, so the more you can just eat fruits without adding things, the better off you'll be. So what I'm going to do is turn this off and show you another step that I sometimes do when I make my applesauce. So here I have my pot of applesauce. What I'm planning on doing now is taking a blender and just scooping out, taking some of this, and again, it looks like a nice chunky applesauce. And you don't want to fill this too full. You want to leave a little bit of headspace so it doesn't kind of come out the top for you. Make sure that's on tightly. Put on the lid. I'm going to take my cloth, just hold it on, because remember the applesauce is hot and you don't want to burn yourself in case it should come popping up. And just turn it on. I turn it on low to begin with. The reason I do this with the blender is because I left the peels in, this will help chop it up and it'll take care of some of the other chunks of apples. And then, hopefully you can see this, if I pour this out, I have a nice looking applesauce, just steaming hot. And depending how runny it is, I can always take this and cook it back down for a little bit more. That way it'll evaporate some of the moisture and it'll have a thicker applesauce. So I will probably end up doing that, and I'm just going to use the blender on the rest of this for right now. And now you can see I have the applesauce back on after the blender, and it's cooked down about half as much. So there's no more gaps between the apple slices, it's all cooked down. It still looks a little bit watery for me. So what I'm going to do is to just continue to cook this, stirring it from time to time. I'm leaving the lid off. You can notice perhaps on the camera that the steam, it's evaporating a little bit. So that's what I want, is for some of the moisture to just escape. This is also a time when I can do a little taste test. I'll just take my clean teaspoon. You want to make sure that you're blowing on it and just, it's going to be quite hot. It has delicious flavor. Once it thickens up a little bit, the cinnamon might be a little more concentrated. It tastes wonderful. I can taste the cinnamon, but I also know that as it cooks down, there will be less moisture and the cinnamon will be more concentrated. So I'm not going to add any more. And in the end, if I share this with somebody at a meal, they can always add more if they wish. Most likely, from here I'm going to freeze it. And then in the wintertime, I'll take it out, I'll thaw it, and I'll add some to my oatmeal in my morning for breakfast, or maybe have it as a side dish for a winter lunch or dinner sometime. So that's how I make applesauce. Enjoy.